All right, moving on to 17.5. We're going to talk about the nature of ecosystems. Okay, so this is page 339. And if you remember back in 17.3, I told you we're looking at how the species within these populations are interacting with each other on a predator-prey basis. And there's going to be those species or populations interacting with their physical and chemical environment, and that makes this an ecosystem. Well, now we're going to talk about this chemical part here. And specifically, we're talking about the one-way flow of energy within an ecosystem. So in photosynthesis, you learned that light energy from the sun is converted into chemical energy, and that chemical energy ends up in glucose stored in plants, and then consumers will consume that glucose, and that energy is released in their systems. So we're going to talk about that energy. We learned how it was made, how it flows one way in an ecosystem. So first we need to find out who the players are in this. We got producers. Pick a different color here. Okay, so we have some producers. Consumers. Detritivores. Decomposers. Okay, these are all the players within an ecosystem that pass around this energy that came from the sun here we're talking about. And it's not just energy that was made into, a calorie type form from the sun. It's also things like carbon, all kinds of nutrients and ingredients needed for life. Things like phosphorus, calcium, the list goes on and on. And we can actually study the cycles of these building blocks here as they pass throughout the whole biosphere, because remember, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form, and so this carbon here that was in a heifer that was made into a steak that I consumed, that carbon is now in me, and it'll probably pass out in some other way, whether it's CO2 or in waste or some other form. So let's take a closer look at these guys real quick. So producers are worth noting. They make their own food. That's what makes them unique. They capture energy, whether it be from the sun or some other source, and turn that into a usable energy for themselves and for the animals and organisms that consume them. They're going to be at the bottom of our pyramid here. This is where the energy starts once it's taken up from the sun. And so these producers mainly consist of plants, some protists, which are eukaryotic. They have a defined nucleus with their DNA inside of that. Protists are kind of a misfit group because they can be photosynthetic like a plant, but they may not be fully classified as a plant. They have specialized organelles inside of them, things like that. Other examples are algae, and you've got like these red and green algae. Also are kelp, the large kelp forest off the coast of California. These plants are actually single-celled organisms. There are a few exceptions, but they are protists. Next on our pyramid are consumers. These are anything that eats another organism to obtain energy or carbon. So herbivores, predators, parasites, they all consume the tissue of other organisms to get those building blocks. So we can divide these relationships in the way these organisms feed into levels, like a hierarchy called trophic levels. And there's four of them you really need to learn about. The first is the first trophic level, and it consists mainly of producers. So this is your producers we learned about a minute ago, grass, other things that were included in that group. Then there's the consumers. They're broken up into levels as well. So you got things like primary consumers. This is insects. Here we see a grasshopper as a good example. They feed on that grass exclusively. They don't feed on anything that's above them, like a bird, or most of the time they don't. You've got a second level consumer, where this energy has went from the grass to the grasshopper, and now that energy from the sun is entering the second level consumer. And finally, third level consumers that are, at the top of the food chain, so to speak. So let's take another look at our energy pyramid here. Notice the large green bar on the bottom. That's all of our producers. It's the biggest group. It's the biggest energy producer. It's always going to be bigger. And so the way energy transfers to these levels is really inefficient. Only about 10% of the energy in one level makes it into the next trophic level, and so on and so forth. So it's decreased each time. Let's look at this example here. Say we have a base. One day it took in 2,000 kilocalories. Well, how many of those calories are going to make it into the next trophic level? 10% of 2,000 is 200. And it goes on like this until a small amount makes it into that upper tier consumer. And so that's what this pyramid represents, is the amount of energy in each level and how much is actually transferred or makes it into the next as it's consumed. So this is where the chapter material ends for your final. I'm not going to move on to 17.6 like I had originally planned. I think I'll stop it there. You've got, the homework I've assigned is going to, that will do you good to study if you just complete your homework assignments. You'll be prepared for the final, along with reviewing chapter 5 in that light-dependent photosynthesis reaction, even the lecture I posted about it too. Thank you for sticking through this class, and I wish you the best for the rest of your semester and your other classes.